Your friend Bill Maher recently had a black conservative scholar on his show, which gave him the opportunity to ask that age-old question that all the whites want to know. What about Chicago?
Like Chicago, like most of the shootings are young black men killing other young black men. Is that not correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, much more than what the cops do. Why doesn't anybody talk about that? Well, I mean, why aren't there, 100 giant black celebrities who would have the respect of those people saying, what are you doing to yourselves? Why are you killing each other?
This is no way to live. This dishonors our community. Come on. We're better than this.
Right. I feel like it's never addressed. It's...
Although I don't believe that Bill Maher sincerely cares about black people or Chicago, some of you might actually do care. So I want to address this question. And I want you to know it pertains not just to Chicago, but it could pertain to Detroit and Memphis and any other place where there is high levels of crime. So there were some researchers who took a look at Chicago from 1965 to 2020. And they realized over time that the numbers may fluctuate to get more crime or less crime, but they were always focused in two areas. That's the west side and the south side of Chicago. After doing these studies, they realized they needed to do one thing, or three things, but one thing across three areas, and that's reduce the amount of segregation when it comes to race, ethnicity, and income. Poor black people living in an area who don't have access to resources, those black people will not be able to fund their schools because they don't have the jobs, because they were discriminated against, so they don't have the jobs that pay the money that could buy the houses, that would give them a tax base, which would provide a better school, which would produce better students, which could go out and get better jobs if there were those jobs that they would get hired for, so that they could buy the homes, which would fund the schools, which would bring in more businesses, because the community would thrive. But when there's a breakdown, when there's people of the same economic background who lack money, they're poor, they can't fund the schools. So you can't produce the type of tax base that would get you a better school. But all of this is by design, Bill Maher, because once they attached school funding to the tax base, they already knew what was going to happen. America already knew what would happen once they attached school funding to tax bases and then put us in ghettos. They knew we were denied access to the jobs. They knew we were denied access to purchase the land, the properties, that we would have to rely on apartments to live, which would lower our ability to fund our schools. So it's all very much a trick question. What's wrong with Chicago? Lack of money is poor. And it's not just poor, it's deeper than that. And due to the penalty of being black, there are certain factors that happen, such as lack of investment in the neighborhoods, lack of businesses wanting to be there, white flight. Well, all the white people that had all the good jobs left and took their tax money with them. And when they took their tax money, the schools fell apart. And so did the social programs. Now kids have nowhere to go after school. Half the schools are shut down. They're all crowded into the same low-budget schools. They can't retain the same quality staff because, I don't know if you noticed or not, but not every teacher wants to teach at the school that doesn't pay well and it's in a bad section of town. So the best teachers who can go typically do go because life is not a movie that Michelle Pfeiffer plays or Samuel Jackson is the teacher or the principal in. The segregation that's faced in Chicago was not an accident. It was a government plan to segregate black people into these areas. The underfunding is not an accident. Poor blacks, we're not going to put businesses there. We're not going to provide roads, which infrastructure, which would attract businesses. So those lack of things create more opportunity for crime. A lack of resources in any area can lead to a deterioration of the community infrastructure. Community infrastructure, things like churches, parks, libraries, recreational facilities, these things start to disappear. They tend to leave places where there is lack of investment. No one wants to build a business, an institution, a library, All these things matter to a community so that it can thrive. Without these things, people become isolated. If people feel isolated, they feel excluded. And once you feel excluded, that's a petri dish where problems can arise because people want to move out, they want to move out, and they're willing to do things to get out of that condition because they are a human being. And human beings will strive to achieve and strive to rise up out of the depths of wherever they are. Then we add on top of that stigmatization and discrimination. If you live in an area that has lack of resources, people know it. And when people find out that you live from these areas, they extend less opportunities to you. People look at your resume, they see what street you live on. Oh, you live on the south side. We don't want to hire this guy, don't call her back. She lives on the south side. These are the undesirable people. These are the people that lack resources. These are not the people that we want to hire to employ. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You can't get the opportunities because you live in a community where people are stigmatized because you live in this community. People don't go, wow, we got a great kid from this community. They go, screw those kids in that community. This is what happens. Life is not a movie. So when you have a community that has lack of resources, lack of businesses, lack of investment, lack of community resources or institutions, strong civil institutions, churches, businesses, parks, recreational facilities, it becomes over-policed. Once a community becomes over-policed, the people reject the police, which means they stop calling the police, which makes it perfect for crime. Yeah, because people don't trust the police because they get over-policed for the smallest of things. The police don't want to go into the area because they know it's a low-resource area where people are more desperate, which means maybe more risky. And so those police officers are probably more aggressive than they are other places. And those residents are less likely to call the police when there's crime in those areas, which only means there's going to be more crime in those areas. So what happens in the community where there's more crime in an area? Because it's over-policed, less people call the police, which leads to more crime in an area. There's less resources, less community infrastructure, less investment, less opportunity. So it becomes a state of survival. So they get more exposed to violence. And what happens when you become exposed to violence? You become used to violence. You become preconditioned. You become numb to violence. And then you learn ways to adapt to living in an environment that has violence. So you become more violent because you must survive the violence. This is all human nature. This is not a failure of human nature. This is what human beings do when put into a situation. When you're in Rome, you act as if you're in Rome. You don't act as if you're in South Korea. You act as if you're in Rome. And when you're in Chicago, the south side or the west side of Chicago, you act like you're on the south side or west side or the west side of Chicago. Lack of resources, lack of opportunity, lack of community institutions, over-policed, violence. It feeds upon itself. If you really want to address the increased crime rates, you would deal with these issues that cause crime. You would address the segregation, but no one wants to address the segregation. They want to bring in a Lori Lightfoot, and she says, I'm going to fix it, and she does not have the ability or have the budget to create the institutions that would create the outlets that would provide the resources for the communities over a period of time to truly make a meaningful, lasting difference in those communities. Instead, they send in police to continue the over-policing, which only makes the communities contract and be more defensive. You're not adding the infrastructure, nor are you adding the resources or the jobs or the training or the schools. All you're adding is one element, which is trying to stop the crime, which doesn't stop the reason why there is crime. Because that's the long game. And in the short game, which is all politicians are in it for, which is all the newspapers are in it for, the short game, the news buzz, the headline. If it bleed, it leads. So we're only going to focus on the crime element, not all the things that resolve it. You have to tackle the underlying causes, like the institutional poverty, the isolation, the lack of resources, systemic discrimination, and promote policies that foster integration, equality, and community investment. But nobody wants to do that. You want to do like Bill Maher and say, hey, let's just send in some rappers to tell people to love themselves more. But see, it's easier to say, hey, won't we just have T.D. Jakes or some preachers come by and say a couple sermons and everybody can will themselves out of this problem? We could just hold hands and that'll change these abandoned buildings that are everywhere in D.C. or everywhere in Baltimore or everywhere in Chicago. Yeah, that'll fix it. See, people don't want to invest the money that it requires for the long game because the politicians, they come in and then they go. It's just a stop on the road of their careers. They don't want to spend their entire lives fixing Chicago. They want to come to Chicago, get their stripes, move on to the next place. If they're so unfortunate to be in a position like being a politician in Chicago, for instance. That's what they do. They eat off the system, which is there with money for them to take. And that's the same way in Baltimore and every other place that there's problems. Instead of people, most people that are not there to fix the problems, but to pick up a paycheck, just like it is in California or anywhere else, to pick up a paycheck, to feed their families, to take care of themselves, to eye the next opportunity, to build a resume or to build a portfolio so that they can move on with their lives because their lives are not dedicated to fixing Chicago or any place else. So it really is not rocket science, Bill Maher or whoever else is listening. It is what it is. Where was I? Where's my next point? So Chicago has a disinvestment problem. No after-school programs, no summer camp programs, no public problems with public transportation, roads, high-speed internet. All these things matter. Healthcare, ability to supermarkets. You got food deserts. People shopping, doing their grocery shopping at the corner store, paying much more money for vegetables or no vegetables or packaged goods with sugar and shit. So, and people don't have access to nutritious foods nearby. That's not going to foster a great community, is it? People aren't going to be as healthy, which means more people have to go to the doctor, which means more people have more bills, and they already have less jobs opportunities because the businesses leave when there's no roads, when there's no schools, when there's no investment in the community. The businesses go, and once again, we find ourselves in a loop. So the problem is long-term investment, but they don't long-term invest because it's black people, and they're poor black people, and America has had a rule for 100 years that it does not invest in black people. That's why they segregated the community, because they didn't want to invest in black people. So black, lower economic people stuck in an area of no investment. And then you say, what's wrong with Chicago? The crime is just a symptom of what's wrong with Chicago. What's wrong with Chicago's lack of investment. The study was conducted from 1965 to 2020. So this didn't happen just under one administration or one president. It's been through multiple administrations, multiple presidents, and multiple parties, and the problem still persists. If you're still there, this is the best part, because I'm going to tell you now how we fix all of this. It's very simple, Johnson. Very simple, Bill. Are you listening? I want you to go to a community that's thriving, a community that things are going well. I want you to say, what's there that's not here? And I want you to put whatever was there in the great community right here in Chicago. That's it. That's all you gotta do. In fact, you can do that everywhere, from Memphis to Baltimore to St. Louis, Detroit, anywhere. There are poor black people struggling. Go to the white neighborhood where things are well and copy. Cut and paste. Well, copy paste. And you'll fix the problem. But you don't want to do that. America doesn't want to do that because they like us on the bottom. Bill. That's the solution. And they want to say that the problems are not because of the community. It's not because of the situation. It's because of the people. I watched a show on Netflix called The Outlast. It's like Survivor, but it's in Alaska. And those people were dropped in Alaska. Cold weather, rough terrain, no food, no water. You got to catch your own food, kill it and eat it. And those people had problems. They were cold, so they built stuff. You know what also happened? There was crime. Because some people didn't feel like building stuff, and some people couldn't catch their own food. So they had to steal some food. So all these things started happening on this little tiny place on a set of a show because for 1 month they had to live in the elements. And those people changed, Bill. They couldn't change the environment. They couldn't make it warm. They couldn't make a refrigerator show up. They couldn't order Domino's or Instacart. They had to adapt to it. And when things are good, you can adapt to good, but if things are bad, you have to adapt to bad. And that's what people do. It's not a failure it's not a human failure. It's a human survival mechanism. It's either adapt or die. So people in Chicago are adapting to this situation, to the environment that is shit in Chicago. And it is that way on purpose. It's been that way from 1965, at least before then, but the study was from 65 to 2020. And we can fix it. But they don't want to invest in Chicago. Illinois don't want to invest in Chicago because it's black. Same reason why they don't want to invest in Memphis or in Baltimore. Because it's black. And people like you and other people believe it's better to say it's a failure of culture. That's what's wrong with the black people. They're not worth the investment because they don't care about their own communities. They don't own the community. They don't own a home in it. They can't afford it. Or there are none. They can't get the loans for the businesses. They have no businesses. They have no infrastructure. They have no community resources because of community disinvestment. White flight took the tax base. The schools are shit. They live in food deserts. And there's crime due to hopelessness, the lack of resources, and horrible schools. And you need to fix all of that. And then you'll fix crime. But you gotta fix all of that shit. That's how you fix crime. And nobody wants to fix all of that. So they want to call the cops to fix the crime. But they don't want to fix the things that cause the crime. They want abs, but nobody wants to do sit-ups. And that's not the people of Chicago. That's Chicago. That's America, and that's how it treats poor people, particularly poor black people. Can you hear me, Bill? Do you hear me, Bill? Do you hear me, Faulkner out there in Fox News? Do you hear me, Candace Kunitz? Do you hear me? Conservatives who want to conserve what? I don't know. This way of life, this is what you want to conserve? See, I'm a progressive because I want to progress past this. You want to conserve this. You want to make America more of this. Because Chicago's always been shit. So that's the problem. That's what's going on. And we can fix it. But America has no will into fixing it. So back in the day when I lived in the hood, and when we finally got enough money to get out, we got out the hood because us having an intact family would not change the environment that we lived in because it didn't have resources. It did not have good schools. There was crime. So we did the only thing that we could do, which was leave, which is what people do. And when you leave and build a home somewhere else, there's no taxes there. And nobody was coming to save us. So we had to leave. But if you cannot leave, you have to adapt. And over time, you become conditioned. You, Bill, I know it seems weird, Bill, but you can survive without weed. If you were in an environment locked in a room where there was no weed, eventually, Bill Maher, you'd stop smoking because you couldn't. And if you were in an environment where there was weed and you didn't smoke, eventually at some point you probably would take some weed and smoke some weed. Because people adapt. Listen, the way you fix Chicago is the same way you fix any problem anywhere. You gotta first care about the people, which America doesn't. They're black and they're poor, they're expendable. But that's what you gotta do. It ain't about bringing Kanye in to talk. No one cares what Ja Rule thinks. But that's how you fix Chicago. So come on, Bill. Let's go fix it. Since you're so concerned. Because you wouldn't just be saying this, asking this question rhetorically. You really want to fix it, don't you, Bill? You really want to do something. You ain't just fucking with us, are you? Well, let's do something then, Bill. I just told you how. I see you Sunday at 7 p.m. on the Black Table.